Like him or hate him, and few people genuinely hate him, Jonathan Swift is a lot of fun. You can develop a lot of opinions about him. He was a very prolific figure. He's a very controversial figure. But his work is a gem within the tradition of English letters, but also Irish letters, obviously. He was an Irish and English, to a degree, satirist, novelist, poet, essayist. He was Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, and he was a leading figure of the Enlightenment and Counter-Enlightenment simultaneously. Very, very interesting guy. Lived a long life, wrote a lot. One of the more interesting aspects is just of his character is just his relationship with his home. Is he English or is he Irish? Well, the evidence points mostly to Irish, but he had some conflict about that. He was born in Dublin. He was educated at Trinity College in Dublin. He spent most of his public career in the church, working in or near Dublin, during which time he was a consistent advocate for Ireland and its relationships with Great Britain. And he died and is buried in Dublin. And yet, he has significantly mixed feelings, I think it's fair to say, about the Irish people themselves. He was from them, but not of them, you might say. And this extended to many realms of his life, of his practice, of his philosophies. He was once described as a Whig in politics and a Tory in religion, and this is an assessment that he himself endorsed. He was aligned with the Church of England, very much so. He was a cleric in the church for much of his career. He was able to find some preferment in that. Early in his life, he was associated politically with the Whigs, but slowly turned Tory, especially in the first decade or so of the 18th century. His professional ascent through administration, government work was largely stalled once George I became King of England. George I was a largely absentee king. He spent long sojourns in his native Germany. He was the first of the Hanover line, after all, and left much of the day-to-day governing to his very powerful, very Whig Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. And that essentially, by then, Swift was largely a figure of Tory politics, and so that left him out in the cold, so to speak, for his professional ambitions. The personal relationship that you find with Swift is equally curious. He never married. He had two long-standing relationships. It's a little uncertain what they were, with two women, both named Estelle, oddly. One of whom he nicknamed Stella, the other he nicknamed Vanessa, and those two figures are pretty prominent in a lot of his poetry. It is a curiosity of his life, and perhaps inviting some speculation about his bachelor status from cradle to grave. He did have great friendships. He was a very social man. Friendships with some of the leading figures of the Enlightenment and late Restoration periods. Figures like Alexander Pope, Thomas Sheridan, John Gay, Dr. John Arbuthnot. These friendships were largely intact throughout Swift's adult life, and they were prominent figures of the London coffee house scene, conversing with one another, some of the great conversationalists of the age, and Swift particularly valued conversation. And the prominent, however homosocial, relationships that he had were probably the most important relationships that he had throughout his life. And he did live, after all. He died when he was just shy of his 78th birthday, so it was a very long life. As a writer, he is very significant for the ability to bounce back and forth between multiple modes. But his primary mode was satire, which Samuel Johnson defines as writing in which wickedness and folly is censured. An apt description of Swift's entire DNA. His first major work was a prose satire called A Tale of a Tub. It is a parodic allegory of Catholicism, Calvinism, and Anglicanism. Very digressive, very verbose. There's an unreliable narrator. The title itself is a play on the ship of state threatened by Hobbes's Leviathan. It makes fun of the efforts of human beings to govern themselves or organize themselves, let's say. This was followed and largely co-published with The Battle of the Books, another satire, this one set in a library, a clash between the ancient and modern authors and the ideas they espoused. He was a bit curmudgeonly, let's say, Swift was in his critical and cultural assessments of contemporaries, and he was very well steeped in his classics as well. So he had a very wide-ranging contempt for the figures who took up the outsized space of cultural tradition. Probably his most famous work, however, is of course Gulliver's Travels. The original title is very long. The narrative of the travels of whatever, Lemuel governor, surgeon, and later captain. It's a big long title. Don't worry about it. But it is another prose satire, novelistic, early example of that. Can be seen as a bit of a lampoon of literature coming out of the age of exploration, where authors were conjuring, in some cases traveling to the New World and coming back and telling stories of it, or in some other cases, most notably Daniel Defoe, just conjuring ideas about what would happen and painting portraits of this world beyond the horizon. And Swift had some comic ideas that were pretty original, some perspectives that were pretty caustic, and took on a lot of the growing attitudes towards this new world as a kind of analog to his own experience of the one perspective of Britain, looking at Ireland and everything else as, somewhat less. And so he was pushing back against that to a degree, while at the same time just writing one ripping good tale. And of course, one of probably his most famous and notable essay is A Modest Proposal, which is another satire mocking the rationalistic sociological critiques of English rule and misrule over Ireland. It is the straight-faced suggestion that Ireland solve its problems of poverty and hunger by encouraging its people to eat its children. It is very arch, but at the same time, it is not just poking fun and having a laugh and being silly and stupid. It has a very serious point to make, and it's not afraid to make it in somewhat pardonably political, but very direct terms. Overall, Swift's particular issues and concerns in his writing are fairly easy to spot as they come up. Number one, always look for an element of physicality. He has repeated reference to bodily reality, let's say, be it excretion, both of let's say defecation, urination, sweating, odors, and all matters of ickiness that comes out of the human body, but also just simple cosmetic imperfections. The age that he was living in was an age of a great deal of cosmetic application, people were powdering their faces and putting on certain dabs of color here and there and trying to cover up little blemishes. This is very common in his time, and he is making an awful lot of fun of it. But that physicality is also a reminder of the animalistic and somewhat brutish nature of humanity. Part of that you can see in the, especially when he's talking about cosmetic imperfections, let's say, it does come across as a bit misogynistic. There is a particular horror, critics have noted, in his assessment of the female body particularly. And you can go down that line of reading and that line of critique pretty far along the idea that, well, he never did get married, and he had these conflicting, difficult relationships with these two prominent women, and there is some frustration readable into those that context, I would say. So there is that. The rest of his work is largely, and well, there is repeated references to bodily horror, let's say again, but also the female characters can be a little superficial from time to time. They are largely, again, his characters and his portraits of humanity are somewhat homosocial, like his relationships with his male friends. All of this does point to, I would say, a repeated emphasis on human limitations. He is constantly pumping the brakes on his culture's aspirational optimism and reminding people that, no matter how enlightened we may all be, no matter how rational we may all be, we are still at heart animals. We are still somewhat brutish and common and dirty animals. It is the everybody poops sense of human civilization. But within that also, I would say the other broad concept to look for is a subjectified critique of civilization. The constant refrain that there is more than one way of looking at something. There is more than one way of life. In Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Crusoe lands in an island and rebuilds from scratch British civilization, and it is all his one act. In Gulliver's Travels, Swift has his hero land in established civilizations that just offer a different perspective on society, on the act of civilization building and the values of a given civilization. And so, though the contrast is a way of suggesting that, well, maybe the ways of London aren't necessarily always the best. Maybe the ways of Europe aren't always necessarily the best. Why are we touting our way as superior to all others? These questions, implicit and at times quite explicit, these questions drive the bulk of Swift's thought as an artist. So those ideas are recurring, ideas that inform the comedy that he is often sketching there, and the good times that he is often sketching there. But they shouldn't necessarily undercut the very serious elements of his work, the very thoughtful and considered and artful considerations of his work. He is not a mere scribbler making fun of everything, as sometimes it's easy to paint him, but he is a very serious thinker and artist of the early 18th century whose legacy stretches even till today. Gulliver's Travels is a very popular work to this day. I don't think it's ever been out of print since it was first published, and the comic abilities of it are remarkable. There are movies getting pumped out about it constantly. The narrative itself is a bit difficult for Hollywood, let's say, to organize into a simple 3-act structure, but the visual and comedic possibilities of it and dramatic possibilities of it are significant. So you go back to the original with all of its quirks of Swift's personality and the obvious quirks of the early novel form. And you wade through that, and there you can really start to access the fun stuff, the true element of Swift's genius. And that is what you look for as you move through this absolute genius of English and Irish letters.